June 21st is the 172nd day of the year, 173rd in leap years, in the Gregorian calendar. There are 193 days remaining until the end of the year. This date is slightly more likely to fall on a Tuesday, Thursday or Sunday, 58 and 400 years each, than on Friday or Saturday, 57, and slightly less likely to occur on a Monday or Wednesday, 56. This day usually marks the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere and the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere, which is the day of the year with the most hours of daylight in the northern hemisphere and the fewest hours of daylight in the southern hemisphere. Events 533. A Byzantine expeditionary fleet under Belisarius sails from Constantinople to attack the Vandals in Africa, via Greece and Sicily. 1307. Kulug Khan is enthroned as Khagan of the Mongols and Wuzong of the Yuan. 1529. French forces are driven out of northern Italy by Spain at the Battle of Landriano during the War of the League of Cognac. 1582. Sengoku period. Oda Nobunaga, the most powerful of the Japanese daimyos, was forced to commit suicide by his own general Akechi Mitsuhide. 1621. Execution of 27 Czech noblemen on the Old Town Square in Prague as a consequence of the Battle of White Mountain. 1734. In Montreal in New France, a slave known by the French name of Marie-Joseph Angelique is put to death, having been convicted of setting the fire that destroyed much of the city. 1749. Halifax, Nova Scotia, is founded. 1768. James Otis, Jr. offends the King in Parliament in a speech to the Massachusetts General Court. 1788. New Hampshire ratifies the Constitution of the United States and is admitted as the 9th state in the United States. 1791. King Louis XVI of France and his immediate family begin the flight to Varennes during the French Revolution. 1798. Irish Rebellion of 1798. The British Army defeats Irish rebels at the Battle of Vinegar Hill. 1813. Peninsular War. Wellington defeats Joseph Bonaparte at the Battle of Vittoria. 1824. Greek War of Independence. Egyptian forces capture Sara in the Aegean Sea. 1826. Moniots defeat Egyptians under Ibrahim Pasha in the Battle of Vergas. 1848. In the Wallachian Revolution, Ion Heliade Radulescu and Christian Tell issue the Proclamation of Islas and create a new republican government. 1854. The first Victoria Cross is awarded during the bombardment of Beaumarsand in the Åland Islands. 1864. American Civil War. The Battle of Jerusalem Plank Road begins. 1898. The United States captures Guam from Spain. 1900. Boxer Rebellion. China formally declares war on the United States, Britain, Germany, France and Japan, as an edict issued from the Empress Dowager Cixi. 1915. The U.S. Supreme Court hands down its decision in Ginn v. United States 238 U.S. 347 1915, striking down Oklahoma Grandfather Clause legislation which had the effect of denying the right to vote to blacks. 1919. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police fire a volley into a crowd of unemployed war veterans, killing 2, during the Winnipeg General Strike. 1919. Admiral Ludwig von Reuter scuttles the German fleet in Scapa Flow, Orkney. The 9 sailors killed are the last casualties of World War I. 1929. An agreement brokered by U.S. Ambassador Dwight Whitney Morrow ends the Cristero War in Mexico. 1931. Year conscription comes into force in France. 1940. The first successful west-to-east navigation of Northwest Passage begins at Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. 1942. World War II. Tobruk falls to Italian and German forces. 1942. World War II. A Japanese submarine surfaces near the Columbia River in Oregon, firing 17 shells at nearby Fort Stevens in one of only a handful of attacks by Japan against the United States mainland. 1945. World War II. The Battle of Okinawa ends when the organized resistance of Imperial Japanese Army forces collapses in the Mabuna area on the southern tip of the main island. 1952. The Philippine School of Commerce, through a Republic Act, is converted to Philippine College of Commerce, later to be the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. 1957. Ellen Fairclough is sworn in as Canada's first female cabinet minister. 1963. Cardinal Giovanni Battista Montini is elected as Pope Paul VI. 1964. 3 civil rights workers, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney and Mickey Schwerner, are murdered in Neshoba County, Mississippi, United States, by members of the Ku Klux Klan. 1970. Penn Central declares Section 77 bankruptcy, largest ever U.S. corporate bankruptcy up to this date. 1973. In handing down the decision in Miller v. California 413 U.S. 15, the Supreme Court of the United States establishes the Miller test for obscenity in U.S. law. 1982. John Hinckley is found not guilty by reason of insanity for the attempted assassination of U.S. President Ronald Reagan. 1989 The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Texas v. Johnson that American flag burning was a form of political protest protected by the First Amendment. 2000 Section 28 of the Local Government Act 1988, outlawing the promotion of homosexuality in the United Kingdom, is repealed in Scotland with a 99-17 vote. 2001 A federal grand jury in Alexandria, Virginia, indicts 13 Saudis and a Lebanese in the 1996 bombing of the Khobar Towers in Saudi Arabia that killed 19 American servicemen. 2004 Spaceship One becomes the first privately funded spaceplane to achieve spaceflight. 2005 Edgar Ray Killen, who had previously been acquitted for the murders of James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Mickey Schwerner, is convicted of manslaughter 41 years afterwards. The case had been reopened in 2004. 2006 Pluto's newly discovered moons are officially named Nix and Hydra. 2009 Greenland assumes self-rule. 2012 A boat carrying more than 200 refugees capsized in the Indian Ocean between the Indonesian island of Java and Christmas Island, killing 17 people and leaving 70 others missing. Births 598 Pope Martin I, d. 656. 906 Ahmad ibn Muhammad, Safarid Emir, d. 963. 1002 Pope Leo IX, d. 1054. 1226 Boleslaw V the Chaste of Poland, d. 1279. 1521 John II, Duke of Schleswig-Holstein-Haderslev, d. 1580. 1528 Maria of Austria, Holy Roman Empress, d. 1603. 1535 Leonard Rauwolf, German physician and botanist, d. 1596. 1639 Increase Mather, American minister and author, d. 1723. 1676 Anthony Collins, English philosopher and author, d. 1729. 1706 John Dolland, English optician and astronomer, d. 1761. 1710 James Short, Scottish-English mathematician and optician, d. 1768. 1712 Luc Urbain de Bouexec, Comte de Gaichen, French admiral, d. 1790. 1730 Motori Norinaga, Japanese poet and scholar, d. 1801. 1732 Johann Christoph Friedrich Bach, German pianist and composer, d. 1791. 1736 Enoch Poor, American general, d. 1780. 1741 Prince Benedetto, Duke of Chablais, d. 1808. 1750 Pierre-Nicolas Beauvalet, French sculptor and illustrator, d. 1818. 1759 Alexander J. Dallas, American lawyer and politician, 6th United States Secretary of the Treasury, d. 1817. 1763 Pierre-Paul Royer Collard, French philosopher and academic, d. 1845. 1764 Sidney Smith, English admiral and politician, d. 1840. 1774 Daniel D. Tompkins, American lawyer and politician, 6th Vice President of the United States, d. 1825. 1781 Simeon Denis Poisson, French mathematician and physicist, d. 1840. 1786 Charles Edward Horne, English singer-songwriter, d. 1849. 1792 Ferdinand Christian Bohr, German theologian and scholar, d. 1860. 1797 Wilhelm Kuchelbecker, Russian poet and author, d. 1846. 1805 Charles Thomas Jackson, American physician and geologist, d. 1880. 1811 Carlo Matteucci, Italian physicist and neurophysiologist, d. 1868. 1814 Anton Nunn, German anatomist and academic, d. 1889. 1823 Jean Chicornic, French astronomer, d. 1873. 1825 Thomas Edward Cliff Leslie, Irish economist and jurist, d. 1882. 1825 William Stubbs, English bishop and historian, d. 1901. 1828 Ferdinand André Fouquet, French geologist and academic, d. 1904. 1834 Franz de Court, Flemish poet and author, d. 1878. 1839 Joaquim Maria Machado de Assis, Brazilian author, poet, and playwright, d. 1908. 1845 Samuel Griffith, Welsh-Australian politician, 9th Premier of Queensland, d. 1920. 1845 Arthur Cowper Ranyard, English astrophysicist and astronomer, d. 1894. 1846 Marion Adams Acton, Scottish-English author and playwright, d. 1928. 1850 Daniel Carter Beard, American author and illustrator, co-founded the Boy Scouts of America, d. 1940. 1941, 1858 Medardo Rosso, Italian sculptor and educator, d. 1928, 1859 Henry Osawa Tanner, American-French painter and illustrator, d. 1937, 1862 Damrong Rajanubab, Thai historian and author, d. 1943, 1863 Max Wolf, German astronomer and academic, d. 1932, 1864 Heinrich Wülfling, Swiss historian and critic, d. 1945, 1867 Oskar Florianus Blumner, German-American painter and illustrator, d. 1938, 1868 Edwin Stephen Goodrich, English zoologist and anatomist, d. 1946, 1870 Clara Immerwahr, Jewish-German chemist and academic, d. 1915, 1870 Anthony Mitchell, English-Australian engineer, d. 1959, 1876 Willem Hendrik Keesum, Dutch physicist and academic, d. 1956, 1880 Arnold Gessel, American psychologist and pediatrician, d. 1961, 1880 Josiah Stamp, 1st Baron Stamp, English economist and civil servant, d. 1941, 1882 Use Companies, Spanish lawyer and politician, 123rd President of Catalonia, d. 1940, 1882 Adrianus de Jong, Dutch fencer and soldier, d. 1966, 1882 Rockwell Kent, American painter and illustrator, d. 1971, 1883 Fyodor Gladkov, Russian author and educator, d. 1958, 1884 Claude Auchinleck, English field marshal, d. 1981, 1887 Norman L. Bowen, Canadian geologist and petrologist, d. 1956, 1889 Ralph Craig, American sprinter and sailor, d. 1972, 1891 Pierluigi Nervi, Italian architect and engineer, co-designed the Pirelli Tower and Cathedral of St. Mary of the Assumption, d. 1979, 1891 Hermann Scherchen, German-Swiss viola player and conductor, d. 1966, 1892 Reinhold Niebuhr, American theologian and academic, d. 1971, 1893 Alois Haba, Czech composer and educator, d. 1973, 1894 Millward Kennedy, English journalist and civil servant, d. 1968, 1896 Charles Mommsen, American admiral, invented the Mommsen lung, d. 1967, 1898 Donald C. Petey, American botanist and author, d. 1964, 1899 Pavel Haas, Czech composer, d. 1944, 1902 Howie Morans, Canadian ice hockey player and coach, d. 1937, 1903 Hermann Engelhard, German runner and coach, d. 1984, 1903 Al Hirschfeld, American caricaturist, painter and illustrator, d. 2003, 1905 Jacques Godot, French journalist, d. 2000, 1905 Jean-Paul Sartre, French philosopher and author, d. 1980, 1908 William Frankenau, American philosopher and academic, d. 1994, 1910 Alexander Verdovsky, Russian poet and author, d. 1971, 1911 Irving Fine, American producer and manager, d. 2012, 1912 Kazimierz Leski, Polish pilot and engineer, d. 2000, 1912 Mary McCarthy, American novelist and critic, d. 1989, 1912 Vishnu Prabhakar, Indian author and playwright, d. 2009, 1913 Madhahe Panasi Hothero, Sri Lankan monk and scholar, d. 2003, 1913 Louis Tariq, Filipino political activist, d. 2005, 1914 William Vickery, Canadian-American economist and academic, Nobel Prize laureate, d. 1996, 1915 Wilhelm Glees, German soldier and astronomer, d. 1993, 1916 Joseph Cyril Bamford, English businessman, founded J.C. Bamford, d. 2001, 1916 Herbert Friedman, American physicist and astronomer, d. 2000, 1916 Buddy O'Connor, Canadian ice hockey player, d. 1977, 1918 Robert A. Boyd, Canadian engineer, d. 2006, 1918 James Joll, English historian, author, and academic, d. 1994, 1918 Eddie Lopet, American baseball player, coach, and manager, d. 1992, 1918 Tibor Shella, Hungarian mathematician and academic, d. 1955, 1918 Josephine Webb, American engineer, 1919 Antonia Messina, Italian martyr and saint, d. 1935, 1919 Gerard Pelletier, Canadian journalist and politician, d. 1997, 1919 Vladimir Simaging, Russian chess player and coach, d. 1968, 1919 Paolo Soleri, Italian-American architect, designed the Cosanti, d. 2013, 1920 Hans Gerschwiler, Swiss figure skater, 1921 Judy Holliday, American actress and singer, d. 1965, 1921 Jane Russell, American actress and singer, d. 2011, 1921 William Edwin Self, American actor, producer, and production manager, d. 2010, 1923 Jacques Ebert, Canadian journalist and politician, d. 2007, 1924 Pontus Hulti N, Swedish art collector and historian, d. 2006, 1924 Jean Laplanche, French psychoanalyst and academic, d. 2012, 1925 Larissa Avdeeva, Russian mezzo-soprano, d. 2013, 1925 Giovanni Spadolini, Italian journalist and politician, 45th Prime Minister of Italy, d. 1994, 1925 Maureen Stapleton, American actress, d. 2006, 1926 Fred Cohn, American football player, 1926 Conrad Hall, French-American cinematographer, d. 2003, 1927 Carl Stokes, American lawyer, politician, and diplomat, United States ambassador to Seychelles, d. 1996, 1928 Wolfgang Haken, German-American mathematician and academic, 1929 Alexander Lagoya, Egyptian-Greek guitarist and composer, d. 1999, 1930 Gerald Kaufman, English journalist and politician, shadow foreign secretary, d. 2017, 1930 Mike McCormick, American football player and coach, d. 2013, 1931 Zlatka Grgic, Croatian-Canadian animator, director, and screenwriter, d. 1988, 1931 Margaret Heckler, American journalist, lawyer, and politician, 15th United States Secretary of Health and Human Services, 1932 Bernard Ingham, English journalist and civil servant, 1932 Lalo Schifrin, Argentinian pianist, composer, and conductor, 1932 O.C. Smith, American R&B, jazz singer, d. 2001, 1933 Bernie Kopel, American actor and comedian, 1935 Françoise Sagan, French author and playwright, d. 2004, 1937 John Edrich, English cricketer and coach, 1938 Don Black, English songwriter, 1938 John W. Dower, American historian and author, 1938 Michael M. Richter, German mathematician and computer scientist, 1940 Mariette Hartley, American actress and television personality, 1940 Michael Ruse, Canadian philosopher and academic, 1941 Aloysius Paul de Souza, Indian bishop, 1941 Joe Flaherty, American-Canadian actor, producer, and screenwriter, 1941 Lyman Ward, Canadian actor, 1942 Clive Brooke, Baron Brooke of Alverthorpe, English businessman and politician, 1942 Marjorie Margolis, American journalist and politician, 1942 Henry S. Taylor, American author and poet, 1942 Togo D. West, Jr., American soldier, lawyer, and politician, 3rd United States Secretary of Veterans Affairs, 1943 Eumir Deodato, Brazilian pianist, composer, and producer, 1943 Diane Marlowe, Canadian accountant and politician, Canadian Minister of Health, d. 2013, 1943 Brian Sternberg, American pole vaulter, d. 2013, 1944 Ray Davies, English singer-songwriter and guitarist, 1944 Tony Scott, English-American director and producer, d. 2012, 1945 Robert Dewar, English-American computer scientist and academic, d. 2015, 1945 Adam Zagajewski, Polish author and poet, 1946 Per Eklund, Swedish race car driver, 1946 Kate Hoey, Northern Irish British academic and politician, Minister for Sport and the Olympics, 1946 Brenda Holloway, American singer-songwriter, 1946 Trond Kirkvaag, Norwegian actor, director, and screenwriter, d. 2007, 1946 Malcolm Rifkind, Scottish lawyer and politician, Secretary of State for Scotland, 1946 Maurice Saatchi, Baron Saatchi, Iraqi-British businessman, founded M&C Saatchi & Saatchi & Saatchi, 1947 Meredith Baxter, American actress, 1947 Shirin Ebadi, Iranian lawyer, judge, and activist, Nobel Prize laureate, 1947 Michael Gross, American actor, 1947 Joey Molland, English singer-songwriter and guitarist, 1947 Fernando Savater, Spanish philosopher and author, 1948 Jovan Akimovic, Serbian footballer and manager, 1948 Andrei Sapkowski, Polish author and translator, 1948 Philippe Sardé, French composer and conductor, 1949 John Agard, Guyanese English author, poet, and playwright. 1949 Derek Emsley, Lord Kingworth, Scottish lawyer and judge. 1950 Anne Carson, Canadian poet and academic. 1950 Joey Kramer, American rock drummer and songwriter, Aerosmith. 1950 Enn Reitel, Scottish actor and screenwriter. 1950 Trygve Thu, Norwegian guitarist and record producer. 1950 John Paul Young, Scottish-Australian singer-songwriter. 1951 Jim Douglas, American academic and politician, 80th Governor of Vermont. 1951 Terence Atherton, English lawyer and judge. 1951 Alan Hudson, English footballer. 1951 Nils Lofgren, American singer-songwriter and guitarist. 1951 Lenore Manderson, Australian anthropologist and academic. 1951 Mona Lisa Persianen, Finnish sprinter, d. 2000. 1952 Judith Bingham, English singer-songwriter. 1952 Jeremy Coney, New Zealand cricketer and sportscaster. 1952 Patrick Dunleavy, English political scientist and academic. 1952 Koichi Mashimo, Japanese director and screenwriter. 1953 Benazir Bhutto, Pakistani financier and politician, 11th Prime Minister of Pakistan, d. 2007. 1954 Mark Gudmundsson, Icelandic economist. 1954 Mark Kimmitt, American general and politician, 16th Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Political Military Affairs. 1954 Robert Menessa, Austrian author and academic. 1955 Tim Bray, Canadian software developer and businessman. 1955 Michel Platini, French footballer and manager. 1957 Berkeley Breathed, American author and illustrator. 1957 Luis Antonio Tagle, Filipino cardinal. 1958 Victor Montoya, Bolivian journalist and author. 1958 Gennady Padalka, Russian colonel, pilot, and astronaut. 1959 John Barron, English captain and politician. 1959 Tom Chambers, American basketball player and sportscaster. 1959 Marcella Detroit, American singer-songwriter and guitarist. 1959 Kathy Masha, American singer-songwriter and guitarist. 1961 Manu Chao, French singer-songwriter, guitarist, and producer. 1961 Sasha Konietzko, German keyboard player and producer. 1961 Joko Widodo, Indonesian businessman and politician, 7th President of Indonesia. 1961 Kip Winger, American rock singer-songwriter and musician. 1962 Victor Tsoi, Russian singer-songwriter and guitarist, d. 1990. 1963 Dario Marianelli, Italian pianist and composer. 1963 Mike Sherrard, American football player. 1964 David Morrissey, English actor and director. 1964 Dimitris Papineau, Greek director and choreographer. 1964 Dean Saunders, Welsh footballer and manager. 1964 Doug Savon, American actor. 1965 David Bierling, English biologist and academic. 1965 Yang Liwei, Chinese general, pilot, and astronaut. 1965 Ewan McKenzie, Australian rugby player and coach. 1965 Lana Wachowski, American director, producer, and screenwriter. 1966 Gretchen Carlson, American model and television journalist, Miss America 1989. 1967 Jim Brewer, American comedian, actor, and producer. 1967 Derek Coleman, American basketball player and sportscaster. 1967 Pierre Omidyar, French-American businessman, founded eBay. 1967 Carrie Preston, American actress, director, and producer. 1967 Yingluck Shinawat, Thai businesswoman and politician, 28th Prime Minister of Thailand. 1968 Sonique, English singer-songwriter and DJ. 1970 Eric Reed, American pianist and composer. 1971 Tyrone Drake Ford, American football player. 1972 Nobuharu Asahara, Japanese sprinter and long jumper. 1972 Neil Doak, Northern Irish cricketer and rugby player. 1972 Irene van Dijk, South African-New Zealand netball player. 1973 Juliette Lewis, American actress and singer-songwriter. 1973 John Mitchell, English guitarist, vocalist and songwriter. 1974 Rob Kelly, American football player. 1974 Craig Lowndes, Australian race car driver. 1974 Flavio Roma, Italian footballer. 1975 Brian Simmons, American football player. 1976 Shelley Craft, Australian television television host. 1976 Mike Einziger, American guitarist and songwriter. 1976 Nigel Lepan, Australian footballer and coach. 1977 Michael Gomez, Irish boxer. 1977 Al Wilson, American football player. 1978 Matt Kuchar, American golfer. 1978 Cristiano Lupitelli, Italian footballer. 1978 Dejan Ognjanovic, Montenegrin footballer. 1979 Kostas Katsaranis, Greek footballer. 1979 Chris Pratt, American actor. 1980 Michael Crocker, Australian rugby league player and sportscaster. 1980 Lukasz Cyborowski, Polish chess player. 1980 David Gentoli, American actor. 1980 Richard Jefferson, American basketball player. 1980 Sandy Arleal, Dominican baseball player. 1981 Yan Doniz, Canadian ice hockey player. 1981 Garrett Jones, American baseball player. 1981 Brandon Flowers, American singer-songwriter. 1981 Brad Walker, American pole vaulter. 1982 Lee Dae-ho, South Korean baseball player. 1982 Prince William, Duke of Cambridge. 1983 Edward Snowden, American activist and academic. 1984 Franck Pereira, French race car driver. 1985 Chris Allen, American singer-songwriter and guitarist. 1985 Lana Del Rey, American singer-songwriter. 1985 Sentayahu Ajig, Ethiopian runner. 1985 Byron Shammer, Australian footballer. 1986 Kathleen O'Kelly Kennedy, Australian wheelchair basketball player. 1986 Hideaki Wakui, Japanese baseball player. 1987 Pablo Barrera, Mexican footballer. 1987 Sebastian Prodel, Austrian footballer. 1987 Dale Thomas, Australian footballer. 1988 Alyssa Dehan, American basketball and volleyball player. 1988 Paolo Tornaghi, Italian footballer. 1989 Abubakar Kaki, Sudanese runner. 1990 Ricardas Berankis, Lithuanian tennis player. 1991 Gail Kakuta, French footballer. 1994 Basika Rating, Turkish tennis player. 1997 Rebecca Black, American singer-songwriter. 1997 Darius Juice, American football player. Deaths 866 Radulf, Frankish archbishop. 870 Al-Muddadi, Muslim caliph. 1040 Fulk III, Count of Anjou. B. 972. 1171 Walter de Lucy, French-English monk. B. 1103. 1208 Philip of Swabia. B. 1177. 1305 Wenceslas II of Bohemia. B. 1271. 1359 Eric Magnusson, King of Sweden. B. 1339. 1377 Edward III of England. B. 1312. 1421 Jean Le Maingre, French general. B. 1366. 1521 Leonardo Loredan, Italian politician. 76th Doge of Venice. B. 1436. 1527 Niccolo Machiavelli, Italian historian and author. B. 1469. 1529 John Skelton, English poet and educator. B. 1460. 1547 Sebastiano del Piombo, Italian painter and educator. B. 1485. 1558 Piero Strozzi, Italian general. B. 1510. 1582 Oda Nobunaga, Japanese warlord. B. 1534. 1585 Henry Percy, 8th Earl of Northumberland. B. 1532. 1591 Aloysius Gonzaga, Italian saint. B. 1568. 1596 Jean Liebald, French agronomist and physician. B. 1535. 1621 Louis III, Cardinal of Guise. B. 1575. 1621 Christoph Harrant, Czech soldier and composer. B. 1564. 1622 Solomon Schwieger, German theologian. B. 1551. 1631 John Smith, English admiral and explorer. B. 1580. 1652 Inigo Jones, English architect, designed the Queen's House and Wilton House. B. 1573. 1661 Andrea Sacchi, Italian painter. B. 1599. 1737 Mathieu Marais, French author, critic, and jurist. B. 1664. 1738 Charles Townshend, 2nd Viscount Townshend, English politician, Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. B. 1674. 1796 Richard Gridley, American soldier and engineer. B. 1710. 1824 Etienne Aignan, French playwright and translator. B. 1773. 1865 Frances Adeline Seward, American wife of William H. Seward. B. 1824. 1874 Anders Jonas Engström, Swedish physicist and astronomer. B. 1814. 1876 Antonio López de Santa Anna, Mexican general and politician, 8th President of Mexico. B. 1794. 1880 Theophilus H. H. Holmes, American general, b. 1804, 1893 Leland Stanford, American businessman and politician, 8th Governor of California, b. 1824, 1908 Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, Russian composer and educator, b. 1844, 1914 Bertha von Suttner, Austrian journalist and author, Nobel Prize laureate, b. 1843, 1929 Leonard Trelawney Hobhouse, English sociologist, journalist, and academic, b. 1864, 1934 Thorne Smith, American author, b. 1892, 1940 Smedley Butler, American general, Medal of Honor recipient, b. 1881, 1940 Edouard Vuillard, French painter, b. 1868, 1951 Charles Dillon Perrine, American astronomer, b. 1867, 1951 Gustave Sandras, French gymnast, b. 1872, 1952 Wap May, Canadian captain and pilot, b. 1896, 1954 Gideon Sundback, Swedish-American engineer, developed the zipper, b. 1880, 1957 Claude Ferreira, French captain and author, b. 1876, 1957 Johannes Stark, German physicist and academic, Nobel Prize laureate, b. 1874, 1964 James Chaney, American civil rights activist, b. 1943, 1964 Andrew Goodman, American civil rights activist, b. 1943, 1964 Michael Schwerner, American civil rights activist, b. 1939, 1967 Theodore Sizer, American professor of the history of art, b. 1892, 1969 Maureen Connolly, American tennis player, b. 1934, 1970 Sukarno, Indonesian engineer and politician, first president of Indonesia, b. 1901, 1970 Piers Courage, English race car driver, b. 1942, 1976 Margaret Herrick, American librarian, b. 1902, 1980 Bert Kaempfert, German conductor and composer, b. 1923, 1981 Don Figliosi, American illustrator and animator, b. 1909, 1985 Hector Boiardi, Italian-American chef and businessman, founded Chef Boiardi, b. 1897, 1985 Tage Erlander, Swedish lieutenant and politician, 25th Prime Minister of Sweden, b. 1901, 1986 Assa Rabana, Lebanese singer-songwriter and producer, b. 1923, 1987 Madman Muntz, American engineer and businessman, founded the Muntz Car Company, b. 1914, 1988 Bobby Dodd, American football coach, b. 1908, 1990 Cedric Belfrage, English journalist and author, co-founded the National Guardian, b. 1904, 1990 June Christie, American singer, b. 1925, 1992 Ben Alexander, Australian rugby league player, b. 1971, 1992 Rudra Muhammad Shahidullah, Bangladeshi poet, author, and playwright, b. 1956, 1992 Li Shanian, Chinese captain and politician, third president of the People's Republic of China, b. 1909, 1994 William Wilson Morgan, American astronomer and astrophysicist, b. 1906, 1997 Shintaro Katsu, Japanese actor, singer, director, and producer, b. 1931, 1997 Fidel Velázquez Sánchez, Mexican trade union leader, b. 1900, 1998 Harry Cranbrook Allen, English historian, b. 1917, 1998 Anastasio Balestrero, Italian cardinal, b. 1913, 1998 Al Campanis, American baseball player and manager, b. 1916, 1999 Kami, Japanese drummer, b. 1973, 2000 Alan Hovhannes, Armenian-American pianist and composer, b. 1911, 2001 John Lee Hooker, American singer-songwriter and guitarist, b. 1917, 2001 Soad Hosni, Egyptian actress and singer, b. 1942, 2001 Carol O'Connor, American actor and producer, b. 1924, 2002 Timothy Findley, Canadian author and playwright, b. 1930, 2003 Roger Nielsen, Canadian ice hockey player and coach, b. 1934, 2003 Liana Rise, American soldier and author, b. 1924, 2004 Leonel Brizola, Brazilian engineer and politician, Governor of Rio de Janeiro, b. 1922, 2004 Ruth Lee Chaminette, American businesswoman, b. 1916, 2005 Jaime Sin, Filipino cardinal, b. 1928, 2006 Jared C. Monty, American sergeant, Medal of Honor recipient, b. 1975, 2007 Bob Evans, American businessman, founded Bob Evans Restaurants, b. 1918, 2008 Scott Kalita, American race car driver, b. 1962, 2010 Russell Ash, English author, b. 1946, 2010 Erwin Barker, Canadian actor and screenwriter, b. 1956, 2010 Ilhan Selçuk, Turkish lawyer, journalist, and author, b. 1925. 2011 Robert Croce, Canadian author and poet, b. 1927. 2012 Richard Adler, American composer and producer, b. 1921. 2012 Abid Hussain, Indian economist and diplomat, Indian ambassador to the United States, b. 1926. 2012 Sunil Jana, Indian photographer and journalist, b. 1918. 2012 Anna Schwartz, American economist and author, b. 1915. 2013 James P. Gordon, American physicist and academic, b. 1928. 2013 Elliott Reed, American actor and screenwriter, b. 1920. 2014 Yozo Ishikawa, Japanese politician, Japanese Minister of Defense, b. 1925. 2014 Walter Kieber, Austrian Liechtenstein politician, 7th Prime Minister of Liechtenstein, b. 1931. 2014 Wong Ho-Ling, Malaysian lawyer and politician, b. 1959. 2015 Daryl Hamilton, American baseball player and sportscaster, b. 1964. 2015 Veijo Meri, Finnish author and poet, b. 1928. 2015 Remo Rimati, Italian actor, playwright, and poet, b. 1924. 2015 Alexander Schalt Golodkowski, German soldier and politician, b. 1932. 2015 Gunther Schuller, American horn player, composer, and conductor, b. 1925. 2016 Pierre Lalonde, Canadian television host and singer, b. 1941. Holidays and observances Christian feast day, Alban of Mainz, Aloysius Gonzaga, Engelmund of Velsen, Martin of Tongres, Onisimos Nezib, Lutheran, June 21, Eastern Orthodox liturgics, Day of the Martyrs, Togo, Father's Day, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, Uganda, Pakistan, United Arab Emirates. Go Skateboarding Day, International Yoga Day, International, National Aboriginal Day, Canada, solstice-related observances, see also June 20th, Day of Private Reflection, International Surfing Day, National Day, Greenland, Witripantu, a winter solstice festival in the Southern Hemisphere, Mapuche, Southern Chile, Wilcacuta, an Andean Amazonic New Year, Aymara, Fête de la Musique, World Humanist Day, Humanism, World Hydrography Day, International, references external links BBC, on this day, The New York Times, on this day in Canada.